Hi everyone. So this is the analysis of Maharashtra MBA CET 2026 second attempt slot 1 analysis. Now here we'll see what is the overall paper pattern, and we'll see the section wise details also. So that will also will do the comparison with the first attempt part also. So if I look at the overall paper pattern, there were no surprises in the terms of paper pattern. Okay. So you can see the first section was logical reasoning, abstract reasoning second section, quantitative aptitude third section, verbal ability and reading comprehension was the fourth section. So number of questions 75, 25, 50, 50, and one question carries 1 mark, no negative marking. Fine. So as far as the paper pattern is concerned, there are no surprises. There were proper sections mentioned so that you can choose which section to attempt first, which section to attempt last. So basically, you can attempt any questions from any section at any point of time. So that was absolutely fine. Right. Let's look at the overall difficulty level of the paper. So again, this is nothing different. 2 hours, 30 minutes. Every question was carrying 5 options. You can switch between the sections, no negative marking. Now, if I look at the overall difficulty level of the paper, logical reasoning section, I will say the level of difficulty as moderate to difficult. I'll tell you why I'm calling moderate to difficult. Abstract reasoning, if you look at compare with the first slot, first attempt, many people say it's a easy. Here I'll say it's a moderate part, and there's a reason for that. Quantitative aptitude, again moderate, and verbal ability and reading comprehension also level of difficulty I'll classify as moderate. Fine. So let's understand one by one, section by section. If I look at a logical reasoning section, what are the areas on which the questions were asked? Okay. So look at these are the all the areas where the questions were asked. I've just putting a cross over some portions whether there were no questions asked in on these areas. Okay. So I'll give the feedback of each and every area. Look at number series questions were manageable. However, later series questions were not so straightforward, slightly tricky questions were there. So instead of seeing a later series, there was a series of words was there. Analogies questions, number analogy was not there, later analogy was not there. They're questions based on the word analogy, from where you're actually supposed to find the odd man out. So they're given a word, it's code. Okay, word, it's code. You have to find out which is the odd man out from that. So the pattern was slightly different. This time I saw a new type of question, that is a find similar numbers. So they have given set of 4 numbers. Okay, and those 4 numbers carry they have some properties that you have to crack what property they follow, and based on that with the similar properties you have to choose from your options. So with a similar property from the options, which number follows the similar properties. But the questions were not straightforward because this type of questions was not asked earlier, so students were not very familiar with that type of questions. So students didn't understand what is the meaning of the question first of all. Okay, so some of them were checking for the series, but as it is a similar, it's more about analogy, so you should not look for the series part over there. Odd man out questions were there. Okay, there were questions in number series. Okay, later series there were no odd man out questions, but primarily you'll find odd man out questions in a number series part. Fine. There, when we talk about a series question, in number series question, the questions were find the next number in the series also. The questions were also find a wrong number from the series also. Also odd man out questions based on the number series was there. Then symbols and notations, few questions on that. Coding, decoding, few questions on that. Blood relation, there were a considerable amount of questions. As per my understanding, there were almost 10 questions on blood relations. And most of the questions were of the similar natures, that pointing to a photograph, a man said, or a woman said to a man, something that kind of questions. Okay, so similar kind of questions were there on blood relations, but more number of questions were there on blood relations part. Directions are also considerable number of questions were there, but all were easy in nature. So blood relation, I will say moderate, easy to moderate based on are you able to draw the family tree or not. Okay, but direction says questions, I will say easy. Input output, no questions on input output. Surprisingly, there were questions based on decision making. Around 3 questions were based on decision makings. No questions on clocks. There was just one question based on calendar, which was easy. Okay, from one date to another same date, you have to find which is the day. Now, this is basically the major area or major change this time. There were good number of questions on Venn diagram. So I think as far as the students what reported, there were minimum 15 questions based on Venn diagram, where there were 5 plus 5 plus 5, and there were some individual questions also, others were there, but minimum 15 questions were there, 5 5 5. So one 5 set was easy, one was moderate, one was difficult. Okay, and that is the reason I'm calling this section as moderate to difficult, because the Venn diagram sets, even if the set which I'm saying moderate, if you can't understand that what you're supposed to do, then you will not be able to answer a single question from that set. Okay, as far as the deductions is concerned, deductions were just two statements, two conclusion. The only issue was that it was found that it looks like that these questions were taken a screenshot of some websites. So when they took a screenshot, it was given the instructions. There were ABCD options mentioned, and then two statements, two conclusion was given. So as ABCD options are mentioned, actually choose from ABCD options. But apart from that ABCD option, there were separate options given from which you have to actually choose the options. So this portion you are supposed to ignore basically, because they have copied that question or taken a screenshot from some website. So they were not supposed to actually copy the options, because they're supposed to type, they were supposed to give the options separately, where you're supposed to click the options. But they give a ABCD. Apart from that, they give a different options. So that created some confusion what I should mark as the answer. Okay. So deductions, approximately 5 questions, all were easy in nature. One question probably based on that either or conclusion, where students could have made mistakes. Okay. Data sufficiency, no questions on data sufficiency. Enough number of miscellaneous questions were there. Okay. So there were questions based on alphanumeric series. There were just number series was given. There were just only digits given based on that questions were asked. There were only letters given based on their questions were asked. There were questions based on what I'm saying, a ranking. Somebody's rank is so much from the last, so much from the start. Those kind of questions, miscellaneous questions. So those a lot of miscellaneous questions were asked. So overall difficulty, I will say, if I ignore the two sets of Venn diagram, I'll say moderate. If I consider those two sets of Venn diagram, then those two sets were not manageable at that time pressure. So if I compare with the first attempt slot, I will say there were no analytical puzzles here also. Okay, but level of difficulty I find slightly higher. Instead of higher, I'll say it's a more time consuming part. It is not you can't solve any question. It is a more time consuming part. This time there were few questions based on verbal reasoning. There was only one type, assertions and reasons part. So approximately there were 5 questions based on that. All 5 questions were easy nature. Okay, so you have to understand, read those two, one assertion, one reason, and accordingly you have to answer the question. So I'll say overall difficulty moderate, excluding the two sets of Venn diagram. Those two Venn diagram sets were difficult. Otherwise, all the questions were manageable. The only part is how to manage your time. Okay, because you can attempt all the questions with 100% accuracy, but can you get them correct in that limited? Can you attempt all the questions in that limited time period? Fine. So it depends. What should be the ideal attempt? I will say the ideal attempt could be around 60 questions. Okay, or it could be 55 to 60 also, depending upon which type of question I'm going to skip. Fine. Now, one more thing, I just want to particularly I realized that this time I realized that many questions, students reported that many questions were taken that as a screenshots of some other websites. So the font size was very low. So there was an option of zooming also there. Okay, yes, you can zoom the part, but sometimes the zooming was only for that question part, not what is the data part, not of that question part. So the font size was very low, or let's say this is the space for complete. This is, let's say, screen part. Okay, so student reported that okay, the question was typed only in this portion. So there was no proper formatting of that screen, or whatever the content was typed, that there was no formatting part properly. So that looks like taking a screenshot. That's why there was no proper formatting. Fine. So that was sometimes understanding that data, reading that data takes a lot of time. So as far as the types of questions were concerned, except that find a similar number, there is no surprise. Okay, this is a different type of question. Otherwise, most of the questions were of the familiar types only. Now, abstract reasoning section. Again, if I compare the first attempt, when I did that analysis for the first attempt abstract reasoning, I'll say it's easy. Here, I'll say moderate. The reason for that is not questions were not that really difficult, but it is about the size of those figures. Okay, the elements in the figures were not properly visible. Even you are zooming it 3x 4x, still the size of the that elements in that figures were not properly visible. So that's why tracking the elements was slightly difficult. So you're going to waste the time in that zooming in, zooming out. Okay, also you have to adjust that screen size properly so that all the elements are visible. But as far as the types of questions in concern, look at, there were questions based on what students reported is series. You complete the series, find the next figure in the series. Okay, so 5 figures are given. You are supposed to find a sixth figure in the series. Okay, in many questions, we realized students said that okay, the logic is like this. There's a reason logic between figure number 1 and 2, then 3 and 4. So 1 and 2, 2 and 3, there was no logic. So 1 and 2, same series followed from 3 and 4, and same series you have to get it from 5 and 6. That is the way you're supposed to get the answers. But again, in many questions there was shading. That shading was not properly visible. Okay, the size of the figure was very, very small. So even after zooming in, you are not able to identify which portion is shaded, which portion is not shaded. Even the shape of the elements was not properly visible. Okay, so that created a lot of issues while solving the questions. Rather than the difficulty of the paper, the format in which the questions were given were difficult. Second part is what, in this abstract reasoning only, they had included the questions on counting the number of triangles, counting the number of squares. Okay, in fact there were questions on based on let's say triangle, square. These are the two types of counting the number of cubes also. A three-dimensional figure was given, and the question was asked to find out counting the number of cubes also. Now here, look at, the instructions were not very clear. So you're supposed to count a visible cube, or you're supposed to count a total number of cubes, understanding that some are hidden cubes. So that instructions were not very, very clear. Okay, so there's a confusion in this question. Also, there was a question, there was a 7 figure series. Okay, and they ask you find the two odd figures. Now that's slightly a tricky part, because we already done odd man out only the 5 figure series. They said the two figures are odd. So actually the part is like that. It is not a odd man out question. It is a series question. It's a 7 figure series questions where series followed two figures. If you interchange, okay, then a proper series will be followed. So it's basically, the question was supposed to be which two figures you should interchange, then the series will become a proper series. Actually the question should have been like that, but they just said okay, which two figures are the odd figure out. Okay, so if people are given the further slots, you be careful about that instruction part. It's a series question of interchanging which two figures I should interchange so that it will form a series. Those two figure numbers should be your answer. Okay, so overall, I don't expect the people to attempt a 20 plus kind of thing, because counting the triangles, counting the squares, questions were slightly tricky. So I expect some good attempt could be around 18 questions could be a good attempt, where you can still take, for those 18 questions, you might take 25 minutes, because the questions were not so straightforward. Again, that zooming in, zooming out was taking a time. You were getting irritated because you are not able to see the elements properly. You're not able to see the which portion is shaded properly. Okay, whether the which, there are two types of shading in some figures, that was not properly visible. Okay, so be careful about this section of abstract reasoning. Quantitative aptitude section, I'll say it's a mixed part. So when I said first attempt, the quantitative aptitude reported was an easy section. Everybody said it's a easy on part. So many students attempted con question less than a minute. Here I'll say it's a mixed part. Somewhere very easy questions, somewhere I'll say moderate questions. I'll not say there are any difficult questions, there are moderate questions. However, you'll find that some questions involving a bigger calculations. Okay, so you have to somewhere you have to divide by 37 or some numbers in 1 lakh something you have to divide by 37 to get your answers. So some questions involve a good amount of calculations. There were many questions based on board mass part. There were many questions based on the board mass part. Okay, you are supposed to what I'll say, you are supposed to apply this your board mass rule and you have to add them. So suppose if I say, I just give a simple example. This is, I say it is 10 1 by 3 plus let's say 10 1 by 3. So the expected part is you add 10 and 10 will become 20. 1 by 3 plus 1 by 3 will add up to 2 by 3. If you do it that way, then the question will become simple, right? So there were some questions of addition, some questions were based on mod mass, some questions mod mass, but decimal points were involved. So some amount of calculation was involved. Fine. So it was a mixed part. So in the out of 50 questions, 10 questions were of data interpretation, 40 questions were of your quantitative aptitude part. In that quantitative aptitude, what types of questions were asked? Simple equations. I did not find any questions on special equations. There were questions based on ratio, proportion, variation, no questions on that portion. Percentage, pure percentage, students said there were no pure percentage questions. The question based on profit and loss, partnership questions was that reported was by students. Simple interest, compound interest, in the no simple interest, compound interest questions, couple of compound interest questions reported by students. But students reported that the numbers were so easy that you don't need to do the actual calculations. You just do the approximations, you'll get the answers faster rather than the actual calculations part. Time and work questions were tricky. Time and distance questions were, I'll say, moderate. There were questions based on averages. There are questions based on mixtures and allegations also. Simplification that I can count, I can simplification plus board mass. Those questions were there. No questions on numbers advanced, but there were questions on numbers basics, finding the HCF of the numbers which are having decimal points. Okay. Uh, Plus counting the number of digits kind of questions. So numbers questions were moderate, I'll say. I'll not say straightforward questions. You have to work on these questions. Then number series questions were there. No geometry questions. Couple of mensuration questions were there. But the mensuration questions, students reported that generally you work with the units either meter or centimeter. There was a question where students reported that the unit used with dimensions given so many meters, so many decimeters, so many centimeters. So you need to understand the relationship between that. But again, student reported that even after converting that, the calculation part was difficult in that. So it is not worth doing that part. Fine. Permutation combination specifically no questions, but probability there were questions. Sequence and series no questions. Based on identity, it is combined with certs. There's a question on in quant area. Heights and distances, no questions on that. Okay, so these are the areas on which questions were asked. So maximum questions have we found that students reported is on your time and work, time and distance, simplification, probability. There were 3 to 4 questions on probability. Okay, so this is how the overall breakup was there. Data interpretation, 2 sets were asked. One was a pie chart, one was a table. The pie chart portion was easy. You have to just work on that percentages, but the calculations were involved there because the base number was given was not so a good number. So you have to calculate 1%. From there, you have to calculate the other percentages. So it's a calculation based part. Table questions, look at those numbers where it was not in a tabular format, this information was given. The numbers were not easy. But if you work on approximation part, So if they ask you find total and find a certain percentage of that, if you find it accurately, we can categorize this as a difficult question. But if you do approximation and work on the options, I will consider this as a easy set. If you don't work on the options, you calculate accurately, you can consider this as a difficult set. So most of you might have left this set or might have attempted couple of questions from that, but working on the option was a good idea on that. So out of 50 questions, I'll say 35 to 40 is going to be a good scope. Why I'm saying 35 to 40, it's not can't get more than 40. You can get more than 40, but then couple of questions were time consuming. So good strategy was to leave those time consuming questions and attempt some easy questions on probability, easy questions on that simplification part, easy questions on that pie chart. That is a good strategy for this section. Fine. So 35 to 40 could be a good attempt with a 100% accuracy, I'll suggest. Now, as far as the verbal ability and reading comprehension is concerned, it is reported by there were 4 RC passages were asked, each of 5 questions, total 20 questions in RC part only. So RC questions were manageable. It is not easy, not difficult. I'll say students reported, okay, this is manageable. So RC was not too difficult. It was manageable part. As far as the parajumble part is concerned, in parajumble, instead of finding the passage, you're supposed to form the usually supposed to form the passage. They are given the parts of the sentences. From those parts, you are supposed to make a meaningful sentence. So, like that, few parajumble questions were asked. Also, there are questions on underline phrase replacement or the idiom replacement questions, meanings of idiom kind of questions were asked. Synonyms, antonyms kind of questions were asked. There were questions based on some fill in the blanks kind of things. Okay. Then error identification kind of questions were asked. Okay. So regular typical type of questions, your verbal ability, those kind of questions were asked. When you talk about a difficulty level, the student said that compared to the first attempt of CET, where the vocab was slightly at a higher level, here the vocabulary part was of a moderate level. So VA section, they said, okay, it is a moderate level considering that vocab part. So again, students reported the good attempt, those who are good in vocab and grammar and other areas of VA. The good attempt could be around 35 to 40 because RC is going to be a time consuming part. Those who are not so good in a 30 could be a good attempt for them with a very good accuracy I'm talking about. Now, what could be the overall cutoff for this? Now, as you know, how they are going to normalize your scores, they are going to get a slot wise percentile. Okay. So in this particular paper, I'll say anything, a genuine attempt of 145 plus could be a very good attempt. Any attempt, genuine attempt of 145 plus will be a very good attempt. And with some other tukkas you're going to put, you might get some questions correct in that. So again, the overall cutoff, if you're looking for top college or JBIMS, it can be 145 plus or 150 plus. Okay, depending upon how much is accuracy or how will be the accuracy of the students who are attempting these particular slots. Fine. So compared to the first attempt of CET, I'll say the level of difficulty was slightly up. Instead of saying level of difficulty slightly up, it was a more time consuming. The first attempt CD paper was not that time consuming. Here the attempt con questions were slightly lengthy. A more information is given in a different way. Okay, you have to process more information in a con question. That was time consuming part. Fine. Also, in non-verbal listening section, the figures were not properly visible. There you are wasting the time in that zooming in, watching those elements very closely, and so on. Fine. So that's all about the analysis of the second attempt, first lot of your second attempt of Maharashtra MBA CET 2026. Okay, that's all from my side. Thank you.